As we get closer and closer to the end of the book, I'm like dying to know what's happening. So let's read a few chapters today. This chapter is called Breathe, and we're on chapter 21. Stephen stared at the clock on the wall. What if he couldn't lift the mallet? What if he dropped it on his toe? What if he dropped it on Mr. Kidswater's toe? He could be expelled. Breathe, Jason said from the desk next to him. Stephen took a breath. He stared at the clock. What if someone left his skateboard on his way up the stairs? What if he tripped over it on his way to get the gong? What if he broke his leg? Mr. Kidswater would yell at him for being late. Breathe, Rondi said from the desk on the other side. Stephen took a breath. He stared at the clock. Sometimes it seemed like the hands didn't move at all. Other times he'd blink and it would be a half hour later. Time didn't always make sense at Wayside School. For lunch, Miss Mush made pepper-only pizza. Ew. Stephen ate a slice but didn't remember eating it. His only clue was that he was very thirsty and his tongue and lips burned. He returned to his seat in Mrs. Jules' class. He stared at the clock. Jenny was late coming in from lunch. Sorry, Mrs. Jules, she said. I can't find my skateboard. Oh no, Stephen shouted. Are you all right, Stephen? Mrs. Jules asked. Why did he have to pick me? Stephen moaned. If you didn't want to do it, why did you raise your hand? Asked Matt. Everyone else raises their hand, Stephen explained. I guess I was excited at the time, but now... You have cold feet, said Mrs. Jules. Yes, exclaimed Stephen. He wondered how Mrs. Jules knew that. He felt like his feet were 2 blocks of ice. No wonder she was a teacher. But what did his frozen feet have to do with ringing a gong? Having cold feet means you're nervous in real life. Breathe, said Mrs. Jules. Stephen took a breath. Mrs. Jules' class always had music on Friday afternoons. I'm sorry, we don't have any musical instruments today, she announced. They're all sent out to be cleaned, and we haven't got them back yet. What if the gong was being washed, too? Would he have to bang it on a different day? Breathe, said Kathy. Stephen took a breath. So, we'll just use what we were born with, said Mrs. Jules. And a 1, and a 2. So Dana loudly blew her nose. Ron twiddled his lips. Probably like that. Mac puffed out his cheeks and popped it with a flick of his finger. Calvin and Bibi whistled. Joe stood on his head and sang Jingle Bells. Paul pulled Leslie's pigtails. Ah! She squealed, and squawked, depending on the pool. Stop the music, Mrs. Jules suddenly shouted, and the room became instantly quiet. Stephen, you're late, she told him. I'm sorry, I was so carried away by the music, I didn't even notice the time. Time? Said Stephen. Now, Stephen, said Mrs. Jules, but he remained frozen in his chair. Mrs. Jules asked Rondi and Jason to help. It must be time for him to ring the gong. They moved from either side of Stephen and slowly lifted him up into the standing position. It's time, buddy, said Jason. Time, Stephen repeated. He took 1 step, then stopped. Now the other leg, said Rondi. He took another step. You can do it, cheered Kathy. So weird she's nice now. Bang that gong like no one's ever banged it before, called Joy. Stephen walked across the room. He stepped out the classroom. Behind him, he heard the entire class shout together, Breathe! Stephen took a deep breath. The next chapter is called The Moment, and here's the gong. Is he going to mess it up? I don't know. Check back next to find out what happens.